Let's talk about something that's on a lot of people's minds, but that we don't always have the hard data for. We're asking the question, is porn becoming the new sex ed for teens? Today, we're going to skip the speculation and look at what the research actually says.
I mean, think about it for a second. We live in this age of constant connection, where you can find an answer to literally anything in seconds. But when it comes to one of the most fundamental parts of growing up, where are teenagers actually getting their information about sex?
You know, for a lot of kids, the internet has quietly stepped in to fill the gaps that might be left by school or conversations at home. But this isn't some curated curriculum, right? The lessons are often unfiltered, unguided, and, as we're about to see, they can be pretty problematic. Pornography often ends up being treated like this reliable, almost academic source of information.
So let's get to the data. To guide us through this, we're going to be diving into a 2025 study from the Archives of Sexual Behavior. Researchers in Spain did a big survey to figure out not just if teens are watching porn, but how that habit connects to their real-world attitudes and behaviors. So who were they talking to? The study surveyed 664 students over in Galicia, Spain, and the age range here is really important. They looked at kids from 12 to 17 years old. This is such a critical time when all those ideas about sex, relationships, and gender are really starting to take shape. And here we go, our first big headline number, almost half. A staggering 48.8% of the teens they surveyed said they had consumed pornography at least once. So right off the bat, we know this isn't some fringe activity, it's a totally mainstream experience. Now, if you break this down by gender, the story gets even more interesting, because the study found a massive gap. Just look at the chart. Over 65% of boys had watched porn. Compare that to about 35% of girls. So yeah, exposure is common, but the experience is clearly not the same for everyone. Okay, this next number is the one that really raises the stakes, 28%. That's how many of the youngest kids in the study, the 12 to 13-year-olds, had already seen porn. This early exposure is a huge concern because it's happening long before most formal sex ed programs even get started. But the study didn't stop there. It went deeper. They didn't just ask if teens were watching porn, they wanted to know what else was going on in their lives. And this is where we start to see these really strong connections between consumption, sexism, and risk. And what they found was pretty direct. The researchers discovered a statistically significant link, and that's just science speak for, hey, this is very unlikely to be a random coincidence. What it means is that teens who watched porn were much more likely to agree with traditional sexist attitudes, things like believing in really rigid, stereotypical roles for men and women.
Wow, this table really lays that all out. Just look at these numbers. Active sexting, sending explicit pictures or videos, was over 6 times more common among the kids who consumed porn. Accepting friend requests from strangers online, more than double. Not using a condom, 3 times more likely. The data really paints a clear picture. Where you find porn consumption, you often find this whole cluster of other risky behaviors.
But wait, the story gets even more nuanced. The researchers wanted to know, what are the red flags? What factors can actually predict which teens are more likely to be watching porn? Well, it turns out the answer is a little different for boys than it is for girls.
Okay, so when the researchers crunched all the numbers to find the strongest predictors, they found something pretty interesting. For both boys and girls, just being on the receiving end of explicit texts or having contact with strangers online were big indicators. But for boys, there was more. 2 additional factors were also strong predictors: receiving explicit images or videos and not using a condom. This kind of suggests that for boys, the pathway to watching porn is tangled up with an even wider net of risky behaviors, both online and in the real world.
So, after all that, you're probably wondering, okay, so what do we do about it? Well, the good news is the study doesn't just present the problem and walk away. It also points toward a potential solution, and they call it the case for porn literacy. First off, the researchers point out what isn't working. In Spain, where the study happened, you're not legally supposed to access porn if you're a minor. And yet, every single person in the study who said they watched it was underage. The conclusion is pretty clear. Legal bans by themselves just aren't an effective strategy. So, if just banning it doesn't work, what's the alternative? The researchers argue for education. They call it pornography literacy. The whole idea isn't to just say, don't watch this. It's about giving young people the critical thinking skills to actually analyze what they're seeing and to understand how it might shape their own views and relationships. So what does that kind of education actually look like in a classroom? Well, the paper lays out some key parts. It involves teaching kids to question those traditional gender roles they see all the time in porn.
It means challenging unrealistic myths about romance, really hammering home the absolute importance of consent, and helping them develop the emotional and communication skills they need for healthy relationships.
And here's the really hopeful part. The potential payoff is huge. Remember that strong link we saw earlier between watching porn and having sexist attitudes? Well, other research suggests that this exact type of education can actually help break that chain. It's about building a kind of mental resilience, not just trying to build a wall. So we'll leave you with this final thought. The data's pretty clear. For millions of young people, pornography is their sex ed teacher. The question this research really forces us to ask is, if that's the case, who's going to write a better lesson plan? Thanks for digging into the data with us.